Microsoft, and I'm here today to speak with you about how to build a data culture with Power BI. For a little bit of background on me, today, as mentioned, I'm on the Power BI CAT team. In that role, I basically learn from and listen to some of the biggest customers in the world to understand how they're using Power BI, what their goals are, and where they might struggle achieving those goals, and use this to make Power BI a better product. Before joining the Power BI CAT team a little bit over 3 years ago, I was a program manager shipping features and services in Azure, in the first version of Power BI, and various SQL Server services, including integration services, master data services, and data quality services. And before I joined Microsoft in 2008, I spent between 12 and 13 years as a consultant, as a trainer, as a data architect, as a mentor, as a technical lead. Basically, I've been doing IT for about 25 years and data-centric for the majority of this. And one of the things that I've seen is that BI and how we work with data is changing, and this affects what success looks like. And particularly for this talk, it's going to affect what a data culture is and how a data culture needs to work. So before we actually jump to talking about data cultures and the steps that we can take to help build and strengthen a data culture, I actually want to start off with a brief history of business intelligence, because you have the age of being as old as me, and you may not have been there while some of these changes were taking place to see it in person. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to go way, way back to the days when having data available was unique. I remember back in the 80s, seriously, back in the 80s, when businesses started to get applications that would track, and as more and more data became available, where a given business might have a sales application and a supply chain application and a finance or HR or budgeting application, we then needed to have more reports, more dashboards, incorporating data from more than one of these sources. And because these sources typically have overlapping data domains for overlapping business domains, the need to have a data warehouse evolved as well. And for the purposes of this high-level, hand-wavy architecture, I'm going to bucket a data warehouse, a data mart, a data lake house, basically put these all in the same general category, because these are places where data is staged, it's aggregated, it's cleansed, it's consolidated, it is made available, often downstream analytics use. And once we had this central location to pull in data from multiple sources, there was also then the need for ETL or data preparation, and the tools evolved, whether it was scripting and doing it by hand, or a tool like DTS or SSIS, Informatica, or Azure Data Factory today. Logic and applications to pull data into this central location. And once the data was there, more and more people, they started to become more and more apparent. So the component, the architecture developed, it evolved to include in-memory analytics solutions. So OLAP cubes, or what we have today as tabular models in Power BI and Azure Analysis Services, to make it easier for more and more users to do more of this interactive ad hoc slicing and dicing. And those analytics models are designed and optimized for those analytics workloads. And what we're looking at here is both the state of the art 20 or 25 years ago. So, this would have made sense minus the data lake in the late 90s. It's also the state of the art today for a lot of business applications, or a lot of BI applications. The real difference is that today, compared to 5 or 10 or 20 years ago, the people that are doing the work now include business analysts and less technical users. It's no longer these the data engineers and the developers that are building the reports and doing all of the work. The evolution of self-service business intelligence, which initially was around both the reporting to involve that full end-to-end architecture, where more people with less in-depth technical skills can now do more of the work to build BI applications, to work with data, to do more things with it, et cetera. And I see chat and I see teams yelling at me, letting me know that things are stopping or starting. Can somebody give me a thumbs up to say that, yes, you can still hear and see me?
So we can still hear you and see you. My OBS, the broadcasting out, is having some issues on my end. So I'm trying to keep it going here. It's cutting out just a little bit on the YouTube stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick pause here. Thank you for a quick pause. What I'm going to also do is let me just see very briefly here. I'm going to take a quick moment. I'm going to stop broadcasting over the NDI through Teams. I'm going to check it real quick, and then I'm going to turn it back on. So hang on one moment.
Sounds great.
And we're going to do just a quick pause to see if I can unbug some stuff here. One moment. I'm going to switch to tech. Screen and camera. Okay, we're going to give it a whirl again. I think we're good to go. We did some configuration things on our end. The video feed looks good. The strong data says it's going to YouTube A-OK. We're going to try this, and if we get another crash on the OBS side, we're just going to turn off the video and go with the presentation slides. You're good to go, Matthew?
That sounds like a plan. I will pick back up here.
Yes, please.
Before our brief break for technical difficulties, we walked quickly through the last 30 or 40 years of data and business intelligence. And the place that we reached is where we live today, where there are reports, there are analytics data sources, there are operational data sources. There's this end-to-end value chain that 20 years ago, every single piece of it would have been developed by a data engineer or developer working in the IT department or some analog of that. And where today, more and more of that work is being performed by business users in self-service BI tools like Power BI. And this change, the introduction of data for business users or tools designed to let business users solve their own problems and build their own solutions around data and analytics without needing to rely directly on IT. Not only did this solve an incredible, wide range of problems, it introduced new problems. And this is where the friction around building a data culture really pops or really gets started today. So as we're segueing from the BI intro into the data culture main topic, I actually want to introduce what I mean when I say culture. And before I talk about the data culture, let's talk about cultures in general. And a culture is those shared set of behaviors and values that are shared by a group of people. And if you think about human culture, it may be something as straightforward as the side of the road that we drive on. It might include things like our cuisine and our language. If you think about, I'm going to pick on Italy and the Netherlands, for example. So tell someone from the Netherlands to show up at 6 o'clock for dinner. At least in my experience in talking to my Dutch and Italian friends, that Dutch person is going to show up at 5:58 or 5:59, 6 o'clock at the latest, because from a cultural perspective, they have a specific view of scheduling and punctuality. Whereas if you tell your Italian friends to show up at 6 o'clock, they might show up sometime between 6:15 and 6:30, because that's what showing up at 6 o'clock for dinner means in their culture. And there's no judgment here. So I have, and anyway, I'll stop down that path.
No problems.
But the key thing is the culture is what you do. It's what the people that are part of the culture do, and is what people inside an organization do with data around decision making. And specifically, a data culture is a business or organizational work culture that is centered around the use of data and analytics for decision making rather. And I like to summarize it as there are more people working with more of the right data more of the time to deliver more value and to make more business decisions. So very often, this is a change from having a small number of human experts that have done things the way that they've always done them, and it relies on that specific experience or expertise. And often it means accelerating the pace and the cadence of decision making because more of the right trusted data is available more often. And very often when I say data culture, everybody's thinking different things. So I've done this talk a couple times before, and there have been times when I've gotten to the end and I've gotten questions that made me realize that I never said what a data culture looks like. So I added this slide for this session. And these are the things that, in my experience, a successful data culture looks like for their day-to-day or business cycle to business cycle behaviors. And hopefully I'm not going to read any of the slides, or maybe one or two where I have a quote. But here what we see are business people focused on doing what they need to do. So, your finance people need to do finance things, I guess. I've never worked in finance, but the business users are doing their jobs, and they can take for granted that the information that they need is available to them. They know how to get access to it. They know what is allowed. They know what is prohibited. And they are recognized and rewarded for the work that they do with data, making their own job more efficient, because this is what the culture values, or what the culture rewards. And at the same time, while business is doing what business needs to do, IT is focusing on its strengths. So the data group or the analytics group, or however a given organization is structured, they're not building reports every day. They're not making little minor tweaks and changes and doing all of the tactical work that they would need to do without business involvement, without business authors and contributors. Instead, they're focused on architecture and performance and security and scale. They're focused on making these strategic investments and initiatives, and business and IT work in partnership, not in conflict. So this is probably the hardest thing for a lot of people to imagine, and it's not always an easy goal to achieve. But in a healthy, mature data culture, the business stakeholders and leaders and the IT stakeholders and leaders have a set of shared common strategic goals, and they understand how each of their efforts contribute to those overall goals. And I'm going to pause here, Mike. I know that you're looking at the comments in YouTube or questions. Any comments or questions that I should address before I move on?
There's a lot of great feedback on echoing a lot of the same sentiments. Being able to trust into data culture. One person said, let's see, I'm just trying to scan through here a couple. Actually, everyone's everyone's half whining at me for the feed going up and down. I took off your video. I went straight to just the slides. But
Okay.
everyone is very affectionate for, yeah, this is good. We need to hear more about this data culture stuff, and we need people to trust our data. Yeah, very much in line with what you're saying.
Excellent. So I'm just going to jump in with probably the most important thing. So this is the high order bit, as it were. And that is, if you don't have an executive sponsor for your efforts to build a data culture, those efforts will fail. So I have my little mic drop animation, because if I was going to drop the mic and walk off the stage, this is when it would happen. To elaborate on this, data cultures typically are built both from a top-down executive push and a bottom-up grassroots effort where analysts who need to work with data are demonstrating success, and there are pockets of data cultures that form organically, but without an engaged, truly committed executive sponsor, the data culture only lives as long as the people who care about it the most. So the analogy that I put in the slide is that without an executive sponsorship, building a data culture is like running a marathon in sand. Like running a marathon is hard. Even in the best case scenario, changing organizational behaviors and building a different culture, it takes years and it takes patience. At least for an organization, like a global enterprise, most of the customers that I'm working with. And if you're the one person, like the one guy in the data team that really believes in this, you're doing all of the work yourself, and you're doing it in your spare time, and you're working longer days, and all of these heroic efforts, if that's you, as soon as you leave or as soon as you have your breakdown, everything will fall apart without that executive sponsor, because the executive sponsor is the person who, when the owners of your SAP system won't give you access to the data that you need to include in the data warehouse to enable self-service BI, like all of the scenarios like that, someone high enough up the org chart, like high enough up the organizational food chain to say, thou shalt, you will make this available because of these strategic goals that we're all working towards. Without that type of voice, breaking down barriers, providing funding, making sure that you have the people and the resources to be successful, you won't be. And if your executive sponsor is like a junior exec, like a director level person, and not a chief data or chief executive or chief information officer, these are red flags for the potential for your success. So it may be possible, but it's going to be harder than if you had someone who is truly committed to making it so that you became a data-driven organization. So with that said, with that most important single thing out of the way, I have two sections for the bulk of the presentation. There's the hard part and the easy part, and we're going to start with the easy part, and it is, and I kid you not, data and data governance. It is the technology side of things. And I want to emphasize this often isn't easy, but this is a place where if you are having the right conversations with the right people in the room, identifying where the line gets drawn, this is the early easy step that enables a lot of downstream success. And I want to mention two things. The first thing is that this slide and a few other slides in this deck are taken from the Power BI Adoption Framework, which is a free, publicly available resource that Microsoft has made to help people adopt Power BI at scale. And a lot of it is directly applicable to both building a data culture and related efforts. So this slide is one of them. The second thing is that I have links to it and other resources at the end of the deck, which will be available for you to download afterwards. So if you're looking at the slide, don't worry about taking screenshots or notes or anything of the like. But the most important thing to keep in mind for data governance is that there is no one size fits all. In today's world, where we have self-service BI, we have central BI, we've got all of this data, and both IT and business users building and using analytics solutions built on that data, the most important thing is to understand there's no one size fits all, and the sizes that you have and what fits into a given size is going to differ based on your organization and its specifics. So here I have put a line on the slide that says consistent criteria and responsibilities, and it's about halfway up between the looser controls for the ungoverned business developed stuff at the bottom and tighter controls for the IT developed compliance sensitive enterprise data at the top, but where the line is doesn't matter. Your organization might draw the line for what gets more governed with more controls or less governed with fewer controls. They might draw it all the way at the top, all the way at the bottom. It doesn't matter where the line is, as long as everyone who needs to have a voice in drawing the line has that voice, so that once the line is drawn, nobody gets to argue. They might step back and question the factors that led to the decision, but nobody gets to say, no, this should be in a different place once that decision is made up front. And here, this is sort of a general framework. The way that this often plays out in the real world is that and I'm going to wave my hands because I'm introducing a concept that I haven't introduced yet, or I'm going to use a
Love
concept
it.
I haven't introduced yet. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I said I love it. This is great. New
Oh,
concepts. Let's go.
Excellent. Thank you. So if your center of excellence, or sorry, let me rephrase this. I'm going to step back a little.
Yeah.
So the structure here is a visual representation of a pattern that I see from a large number of successful enterprise Power BI customers, where their center of excellence, which is responsible for providing resources and guidance for the appropriate use of Power BI in their data culture, they basically identify different tiers of applications, where some applications might be personal, some applications might be enterprise, and there are different levels in between. I like this ring-based visualization because it shows that core of enterprise BI apps in the middle, there's a smaller number of them, but it also implies that they are more important, they are more protected, they are more governed. And the other thing, and I want to be mindful of the time here, the other thing to point out is that very often with Power BI, organizations will use Power BI Premium to differentiate between personal and central, or personal and enterprise BI, because with Power BI Premium, typically this is where some of the more advanced features are available. It can be where additional scale and performance is available, but because of the capacity-based licensing of at least premium per capacity, organizations care more about the design, the performance, the best practices of applications that are deployed to premium, because this has a more direct impact on other parts of the business. So one slow application might cost more, from a money perspective, or it might cost more from a performance perspective if it's poorly designed and deployed to a premium capacity. But without spending too much more time on this general pattern, I actually want to jump into a specific customer, and I'm not going to name them, but in one conversation, I think this is like 2019, I've literally had hundreds of these structured conversations with the people who own Power BI inside these big enterprise organizations. But in one of these conversations, he described these 4 rings using these specific labels. And this is a big retail company, and I won't go any further than that. But it's a big retail company where they have an enterprise E5 license. So basically, anyone can work with Power BI if they choose to. So every user has access to a Power BI license, and their central BI teams, or let me actually rephrase that, they're distributed BI teams, because different departments across this large business have their own BI teams, so there is not one central team. But the BI teams make available shared and certified Power BI data sets. So any user, like literally like the cashier, the stock boy, the store manager, the floral manager, the district manager, or executives. So any user in the organization can open up Power BI desktop or use the Power BI service, connect to a data set, and derive what insights they need to. Of course, the vast majority of them either don't work with data because they're cashiers or stock boys, or they are working with reports that other more tech-savvy users, those power users, have developed for them as an audience. But literally every user in this organization can work with data if they choose to. There are some departments, I'm moving into the second ring, or the second ring from the outside, but there are users in some departments where they have more demanding data needs, typically based on the type of business that they do and the data that's available to them. And in those departments, they have more data and more training and more resources available. But they're still end users, still with that broad access to data and tools. Most departments have a small number of power users that I might refer to as champions, where these are people who, based on who they are, more than based on their job role, like, they might still be the store manager, but they're the store manager that plays with Power BI and watches Guy in a Cube on a weekend, like those sorts of people. Possibly people like you who are attending a Power BI user group on a Tuesday night. And they're given better tools and better resources. So they might have like a desktop with more RAM than the standard issue desktop, something along those lines. And they might have the ability to install Tabular Editor or DAX Studio or some other third-party tools, because they're in their own, in their own day-to-day work, they're doing more with data to support other users. And then at the central tier, there's what this business, this is what I love about it. They said, oh, this is like the hardcore IT. So they have central teams of BI developers that are doing what central teams of BI developers have done for decades. They're just doing it with Power BIs. Like, Power BI is the one platform this company uses for all of its self-service and professional BI development. And those pro developers, they're responsible for doing doing the scoping, doing the needs analysis, doing the development, the testing, the deployments, the maintenance, the documentation, the support, all of the things that go into this uh, standard central application. And if we take that hardcore IT core of this model and double click on it, this one customer does something that looks like this. And I'm going to take a quick drink break here. So please hold on a
Yes,
second.
please do. I can fill in the gap here. We've got some great conversation. I have since booted Seth and Tommy out of the meeting to make sure there's no glitches, and therefore Seth and Tommy are now peppering me with questions. So
Tell them to shut up. Tell them from me.
so it's hilarious. So I'm gonna let you keep going. I don't want to break your thought, but we do have some questions piling up, and I'm capturing them for you, and we'll be able to address them in a bit.
We are almost at the end of the easy part, so
No
that will
worries.
be a great time for that break.
Keep going. You're
But
doing great.
But one of the realities of managed self-service BI is that there are often hands-off from business to IT and occasionally from IT to business. And this one customer has implemented a pattern that I see a lot of successful customers doing, where they have a standard entry point into an operationalization process. If you're a business user working in Power BI and you have developed a thing, and this could be a new report, it could be a new data set, it could be whatever it is, you've used Power BI to solve a problem that isn't currently solved or isn't effectively solved by the resources that central IT team has made available. You can go to these twice weekly office hours, get into a queue, and engage with a partner developer from that central team to begin the exploration phase. So you bring in your application, and you and that developer will work together for a time-boxed period, like a week or two, to prove out your idea and basically demonstrate the business need, so that that central team with those strategic priorities can say, yes, this is something that deserves more control or deserves more rigor. If it passes the gates to move from exploration to promotion, they will then set up a gateway, like they'll set up a data source in the enterprise data management gateway so that they can then have scheduled refresh. They will apply the corporate colors and logos and theming to the Power BI reports. They'll make the changes to the PBIX, and at that point, it's now available to a broader set of users. It looks official, it performs better because they've done like best practices, performance tuning, and things like that. And at this point, they basically say, should we keep going? And there's a decent number of applications. I don't have numbers to give you, but there's a decent number of applications that stop here. So it could well be that simply having it in the service with scheduled refresh on the gateway, going against whatever data sources it's been using, this is fine. It doesn't need to go on, at least not right now. But for applications that are going to have broad reach or broad business impact, they'll move on to the preparation and operationalization phases where the data sources get moved into something that IT will manage, because very often they're pulling data from a SharePoint list or Excel or something that the business analyst is pulling in through a not ideally automated process. During that preparation phase, they will upscale the data sources. They will provide documentation for the application and the data that it contains, and they will work with IT, business, and support to ensure that ownership is clearly understood and funded so that as the application becomes supported, that everybody knows who to go to, either with questions about the data, the uptime, or the business validity of the data. And then finally, through operationalization, they move it into a production workspace. IT owns the workspace, it owns the application, it has an SLA, it has all of the support that anything developed by IT would be expected to have. The only difference is that the root of this application, the seed that was planted that grew up into this IT-supported app, it started off as an application developed by a business user somewhere out in the business that saw a problem, developed a solution with their problem domain expertise, and then worked through these well-established and well-communicated processes to hand it off to IT so that that business user can now get back to what she needs to do, solving more interesting problems more efficiently with data. And the final slide for this easy part is actually a Microsoft slide. If you've ever attended an executive briefing at Microsoft's Executive Briefing Center and someone from my team was delivering a presentation on Power BI, odds are we shared this slide that talks about Microsoft Finance's journey from a cowboy culture, this is the left-hand side of the slide, where traditionally Microsoft has encouraged individuals to pursue full ownership. So that's I guess that's Microsoft speak for cowboy cultures. Like everybody had the tools and the data and the budget and the know-how. So people in Microsoft, we had this culture of just building our own thing. And of course, whether it is Excel hell or Power BI hell or whatever tool you're using, if you've got 100 finance analysts each answering the same questions in their own ways, every meeting is going to start off with statements like, where are these numbers coming from? That doesn't look right. My numbers and my spreadsheet look different from that. So there's lots of wasted time, lots of wasted effort. And over the last decade or so this is sort of like this ongoing journey where there's public information about this beyond what's in this slide. But basically, we've come up with a model that says there are some things that absolutely must be controlled and managed and governed and consistent no matter what. And we call this discipline at the core. And very often, these are like the things at the top of the pyramid or at the center of the ring diagram, where if we had wrong numbers and we reported them out as part of our financial results or something along those lines, there's SOX compliance or other compliance implications where there are fines and jail time if we get things wrong. For things like that, there absolutely must be a single source of truth that there is a responsible team for, and there's like all the rigor and all the testing and all the curation and stewardship. But discipline at the core only works if there is also flexibility at the edge. There needs to be this partnership between the locked down stuff and the stuff where people who need answers to their questions today, not 6 weeks or 6 months from now after they get up to the top of the data team's work queue. So in Microsoft, and specifically in Microsoft Finance, in addition to that discipline at the core, we make sure that every user has the data that they need and the tools that they need, as well as the skills and the mandate to use them, so that anything that's not included in this managed core, that they can do their own additive or differential self-service BI to answer questions and solve problems and be creative and be flexible and be agile, but they just can't change the numbers that are part of that discipline at the core. And they can't present their own alternatives to the numbers that are part of that discipline at the core. And this balance between governance for the things that need to be governed, the flexibility and capability for people to do the things with the other less governed or ungoverned data, and the agreement on what should be more governed and what should be less governed. These are really the key. We've made it successful, and we see lots of organizations around the world doing the same or doing similar things with similar success. So please go ahead with those questions before I jump into the hard part, Mike.
Sounds good. So we had some amazing discussion happening in the chat window, and I'll try to summarize a couple of these points and try and pull some key questions out of here. So one a kind of early question on here was, in your view, have you seen what comes first? Is it the data warehouse or some of the reports? And I think that was a great question. Donald asked that question.
So I want to say that it really depends on the specific organization. So for most modern organizations, and I hate to use this phrase because it feels really judgmental or
Sure.
or snobbish as I say it out loud.
Yeah.
But it's 2021. If you have been I'm thinking about Microsoft, but you can also think about like other Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 customers. If you're that big, you didn't get that big without a data estate and some central management of it. You can take the data warehouse for granted.
Yes.
And in that situation, very often the challenge is, how do we let go and how do we let more people do more things with this data that we put so much work into? How are we going to keep up with it? It's a matter of trust going from the data people in IT out to the self-service users. But for, I guess, like the other 99% of customers, or the other 90% of organizations, very often there isn't a data warehouse, and there are these pockets of data savvy. I hate using the phrase business users over and over again, but it's a great blanket term. So these are people where working with data isn't really their job, but in order to do their job they need to work with data.
Yeah.
In order to do their job better, they need to work with data.
Yes.
So they find a tool, they find the data sources, they build a thing. They build a PBIX, and then they talk someone into justifying $10 per user per month for the Power BI licenses.
Yes.
They deploy the application, and after there are 3 or 4 of those things, then they start realizing, oh wow, we've got these redundancies and these efficiencies. Somebody reads a book or watches a video and says, we need a data warehouse. And for each of those journeys, the starting point is, it's the beginning of the journey, but having the people that care about and are responsible for the maintenance, like the DBA type stuff, to keep it running so that it's always up and always right, they need to be there. The business people who work with the data to solve the problems that keep money coming in and keep more money coming in, they need to be there, and they need to work together, and they need to trust each other, and they need to value the work that the other one does because they have this partnership and this trust.
That's a great answer. And yeah, there's so many more thoughts to think to that one. So let's move on to some other questions. This is an excellent answer. There was a lot of questions kind of on, you had the different rings of enterprise. Yep, this one. And yep, this the enterprise,
Yeah.
the department down to the personal. And I think this slide does a very good job, even thinking through like your pyramid as well. This kind of another way of visualizing the pyramid of the apex of being the enterprise data warehouse. So around this, everyone was commenting, this is a great slide. There were a couple questions. Were some of the enterprise items, so let's say we have the central BI, are those interdependent on the departmental team or personal, or do you see these as kind of being standalone in of themselves?
So very often they're standalone in and of themselves, where for the enterprise BI, it might include, because of that operationalization process that we discussed 2 slides after this one,
Mhm.
it might include some elements or some reports that were developed originally as personal BI, but typically that enterprise BI, this is your finance reporting, this is your HR reporting, this is the canned report that gets emailed to the CEO every morning or gets blasted out to every salesperson, at the end of day or end of period or whatever it is. These are the important things that the business knows that it depends on, and there's structure and rigor and funding and staffing. And the further out from the center you get, these are very often the agile, exploratory, ad hoc things that might come and go. Literally, it's like I'm thinking about myself as that guy right now,
Mhm.
where if I have a question, I will spin up Power BI Desktop, I will find the data, I will build a report, I will get my answer. And 8 times out of 10, I just throw it away. I literally never look at it again. I had what I needed. And because of the size of my team, most of the things that I create will not be seen by more than 20 or 30 people. And if it does need a broader reach, let's say, for example, that I'm pulling together insights that everybody in the Power BI team, like hundreds of engineers and program managers and executives, need to see,
Yep.
that's not my job, right? So
Yeah.
I will actually work with someone. And Tomas, if you're ever watching this, I'm sorry for being such a persistent person, but I will work with someone whose job it is, and I will basically go through this type of process with him, saying, "Hey, I've got this data. It
Yep.
really needs to be part of this report that you own, and I will never be able to access."
Yep.
And it's a dance, right? So there's never one answer for all organizations. And for a given organization, it will be different from app to app to app. And even for a given app or for a given user, it will change over time because there's so many complex forces, because it's the real world.
Awesome. Another great answer. And I love this slide. One of the things that we communicate to particularly Seth and I, or when Tommy now talking about how we develop things, I love this idea of the business kind of leading the IT organization. We have this
Mhm.
experimental phase, and I communicate this fairly frequently where we're talking about, hey, the business side needs to kind of get out there and figure out what works. It's not
Mhm.
a it does not add value to us when we have the IT organization building this monolithic thing that no one will ever use, right? It would make a lot of sense for us to quickly fail, build something that may work, and if we can find some minimal added value from
Mhm.
whatever we produce in this Power BI file, okay, we've been looking at a month's worth of data. Let's give it to somebody else to grow this model up. And I really like this whole, you kind of have to slow down to go faster mode. You kind of have to take that governance piece and take a bigger look at what's going on here. And so a lot of those have been really great comments. There's been a whole I'm trying to consolidate like 9 questions here towards the end here. So the last
Yeah,
slides you had.
I'm keeping an eye on the clock as
Okay,
well, so we're going to run over.
that's okay.
I just
If
want to make
if
sure
you're
that we're
okay with
okay
it.
with that.
I am.
Okay.
I'll quickly is if everyone in the chat is okay with it, say give me a thumbs up there too. I think they'd be okay with it as well. Everyone's loving the conversation. So last question before we get back to your slides, if you don't mind.
Hmm.
We have a number of comments kind of going back and forth around, I need to be fast. We need to go quickly. Our business is pushing us to go faster. And so
Mhm.
there's been a couple sad faces, cry faces around these slides are amazing, but we don't have this kind of culture at our organization. How do we, I think part of the sentiment here is how do we get to where this needs to be and how do we grow into this potentially? And maybe I'm leading to your next set of slides here. We know where we're at now, but we're not quite where you've described us to be. How do we grow to get there?
So I want to get back to the most important thing, which is that you need a leader, you need an executive sponsor who will back your play when you say this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the most important thing, because sort of reading between the lines from the way that aggregate question was phrased,
Yes.
the people asking are in that central BI team in IT, and right now they're the bottleneck, right? They're the reason self-service BI tools exist, because the reason that we built Power BI and why there is a thing of self-service business intelligence
Yes.
is because IT teams cannot keep up with the accelerating pace of business change. It's just not possible.
Mm,
Nobody is funded for that. You can't do it anymore. Like, it was even hard to do 20 years ago.
that's a great point.
And to get back to the question as I heard it, the first thing that you want to do is you want to have a success story. So
Mhm.
so odds are right now you have a queue for requests that are coming in. So business users, they come to you. It's like, oh, I need this field added to this model, or I need this report changed in this way, or this new report created. So that's great, but it doesn't scale.
Mhm.
So find the people in your community of practice. Find the business users that are already working with Power BI, building their own reports or customizing things or just doing interesting, complex things in Excel, and get them involved in a small scale, minimally formal version of that ladder or stepped diagram that we saw here. So start small, do one or two of these things, see what works, see what doesn't work, and when you find what works in your organization, start to scale it more. The difficult thing is that you don't have time to do this, right? You've got all these coming in and you can't keep up today. And how are you even going to even think about keeping up if you're starting this new thing, right? This is where having leadership support is going to get you the air cover that you need, because they might be able to say, of the 3 people that are on your team or the 10 people that are on your team, these 1 or 2 people, they're coming off of the standard rotation that is taking things off of that central formal list, and they're going to be starting on this new model. And it's kind of like fixing the airplane or building the airplane while it's already in the air.
Mhm.
It is a difficult period of transition that anybody that tells you that it's easy, they're lying to you or trying to sell you something. But to 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 be part of a bottom up change to drive this type of pattern and behavior inside an organization of any scale, you need to demonstrate success. You need a sponsor that will recognize and reward that success. And you also need uh, um, you need to know that it's okay to fail once or twice before you get going. Because if you're in a business culture where failure is punished,
Mm.
nobody's going to try this. Nobody's going to try the new thing because they're going to get like a crappy end of year review, or they're going to get fired, or they're going to get written up. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
don't do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Exactly.
so yeah.
Oh,
So
love it.
do you feel that I answered the question? Because I feel like I rambled a bit.
No, I think there's again people were affirming a lot of your comments here. I think they love the points. Yeah, they said they're ready to hear the hard part now. So let's get to the hard part. I love
The
it.
hard part is people. So the easy part's technology, the hard problems are always people problems. So I want to step back and reinforce something that I said at the beginning. The information and the guidance and the lessons that I'm sharing in this presentation are things that I have learned from hundreds of conversations with hundreds of enterprise Power BI customers. And what I'm sharing here are the common patterns that I see almost every single successful, mature data culture doing. So I'm not doing this in the real world, but I'm talking to people who are. I'm summarizing, I'm looking for these patterns and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the most significant organizational changes that these successful data cultures make is that they have both a center of excellence and a community of practice. And you'll notice on the slide that it says a center of excellence or network of excellence. If you are this like giant Fortune 5 global multinational company, it may not be possible for you to have a single center of excellence that does everything. In that case, you probably have a federated network of mutually supporting centers of excellence. I'm just going to say COE or center of excellence here, but understand there's a lot of variation and a lot of patterns. But the center of excellence are those people who are responsible for the adoption, use, and successful application of data and business intelligence tools. So these are probably the director level or maybe chief data officer type people and their teams that will get promoted and rewarded if Power BI succeeds, and they will get fired or moved laterally or not promoted if Power BI fails in the organization. So you have the key business and IT stakeholders, typically the owners of Power BI from a business and IT perspective, teams that include administrators, that include like data architects and data developers, that they include the owners of systems and processes and people with budgets to fund the work. So these people in a center of excellence, they are responsible for maintaining the tools, the data, and the platforms for the community, which we'll talk about in a bit, as well as things like training, collaboration, and the like. But that center of excellence, where it includes business and IT with a shared mandate and a shared mission, this is absolutely vital. Without this, it's all finger pointing and recrimination and blame. So having that center of excellence where people are truly vested in and responsible for the success of, I'm saying Power BI here, but it's really the data culture and the data-driven execution of business. This is a key part of a successful data culture. You need the right people working on the right things. And one of the links that I will share towards the end of the slides is to a customer success story with Nestle, this global food company that my team produced. And one of the things that I think is fascinating about Nestle is that they had, and this is end of last year, they had roughly 50,000 monthly active users in Power BI. So they had more licensed users, but on a given month, this is about how many people in this one organization were using Power BI. And at the same time, they had a low single-digit number of people doing the tasks that are listed here in this center of excellence. It doesn't need to be a huge group. And I've seen organizations with tens of thousands of Power BI users with 3 or 4 people in the COE, and they just had dotted line relationships. They could rely on people outside of the center of excellence. It's like a really small team supporting a broad, engaged community of practice, because that community of practice, he says, moving over to the right-hand side of the slide, is where most of that self-service work gets done, because in an ideal world, the people that have problems, they will build data-driven solutions to those problems. It's not a matter of going to IT and asking for help. It's a matter of knowing what to do. And if you don't know what to do, it's a matter of knowing where to go. And if you don't know where to go, it's a matter of knowing who to ask. And this all often means that that community of practice needs to have the people with problems and questions, the people with answers and solutions, the champions from the various business groups. Like, getting back to the hardcore IT slide, where most business groups have one or two people that just love working with data and they're good at it and they've figured it out because they've gone above and beyond. Those people, as well as the people who are often from the center of excellence, who moderate and otherwise curate the interactivity or the interactions in the community of practice, those champions are the ones that step up and say, I have a question for you. Sorry, I have an answer for you. So that you don't need to open a ticket. You don't need to go to IT
Yes.
to ask. And the combination of the center of excellence at the core for these responsible owners where it's their job, and this broader community of practice of people that do it because it helps their job, these are really the key here. And I'm going to put Mike on the spot here.
Yeah.
For those on the call, you may not realize that Mike is a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, or MVP. And Microsoft grants this MVP award to recognize the community behaviors of people who are not Microsoft employees, but they're doing, I'm putting this in air quotes here. I don't know if my camera is on right
It's
now, but I'm
not
literally
right now.
making bunny fingers for the quotes. They're doing our job. They're doing Microsoft's job. They are evangelizing our tools. They are answering questions. They are providing support, and they're doing it of their own goodwill. And I have known Mike long enough to know that he loves this type of event. He loves the organizing. He loves the presentation. He loves being in this whirlwind of activity. People like Mike, they work for your company, and they might not ever run a user group for Power BI out in the real world, but they have their networks and their conversations that they take that they engage in on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis for the things that they do care about. And often those things are related to the use of data for their jobs. Find those people, give them a place to come together. That's what will make that community of practice successful. And there's at least one or two people in chat going, holy crap, how would I ever do this, right? So
Yes.
remember, this is the hard part. And if you don't have an executive sponsor yet, understand these are the things that are really, really hard to get started without someone to provide the resources and the prioritization so that you have the bandwidth to do this without needing to kill yourself while you do it. So if it feels like it's above your pay grade, it's probably because it is.
Love that.
So,
You're too
so
kind, by
with
the way. You're too kind. I mean, so thank you very much for giving the MVPs a great shout out. That's a huge. We just love doing this. We love working with you. We love working with your product team and all the fun things that go along with it. So really appreciate that as well.
I'll say mean things about MVPs to their face, but I always say nice things in public.
Love it.
So full disclosure, I was an MVP before I joined Microsoft in 2008. So I have seen both sides. I know exactly what you mean.
Yes.
And it's those behaviors, the people that want to give to the community, they are I want to say altruistic, but I honestly don't know if that is the right word, but they're doing good things for the sake of doing good things. Give those people a place to do those good things and say thank you to them for it. So let me jump into the slide because I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here.
No, keep going.
So that the community needs a place to be centered. You need to have one portal, or the smallest number of portals possible, where you put everything that community will ever need. And ideally, it will be a place where they are already working. So that's not always possible to hit both of those. But this could be a Teams channel. It could be a Slack channel. It could be Discord. It could be Yammer. It could be SharePoint. It doesn't matter what the technology is. But the key thing is that this is a place where you can put links to reports, information about the data, links to all of the training and the guidance, and to have a place to ask questions and get answers. And because there's only one place where all of these resources and all of this value lives, people, once they get shown it, and once and once it's really valuable to them, they will keep going back. So true story. Back in 2018, I started doing a ton of blogging about data flows in Power BI. And there wasn't a lot of other non-documentation information available. And on a day-to-day basis, I would get sometimes upwards of 10 emails from other Microsoft employees, like people around the world working with customers. They just like randomly email or send me an IM saying, hey, Matthew, I've got this data flows question from a customer.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was getting 10 of those a day, if I answered those emails, I would be getting 20 or 30 or 100 every day. And it's not my job to answer those questions. So what I did was I said to every single one of those, I will not answer your email. I am one individual and I cannot scale for one-on-one direct technical support for a feature as broad as Power BI data flows, but my team, the Power BI Cat team, maintains this internal community site that you have access to. If you go here and you ask this question, it will be seen by this global community of Microsoft technical experts, including me. And not only will you get your answer on a more timely basis, other people will see the question and the answer, and they will get value from it too.
Yes.
And if I answered the question, they'd keep coming back to me because most people are inherently lazy and I would be the path of least resistance. I am not. I am the path of most resistance. So I direct them to this team. I like that. I'm going to use that one. I didn't know that was coming out until it did.
I just think that's absolutely amazing.
So you need to do this too. So odds are, if you're on this call and you're asking the questions that have been asked so far, you're that guy, right? You are the point of contact, the guy or the girl, the person inside your company that other people go to with questions because you've always had answers. In order to break that cycle, that vicious cycle of a death by 1,000 questions, you need to be able to have a portal to send people there and make sure that people who go there with questions get the answers that they came to ask, because you probably have 1 or 2 strikes. So if somebody goes there and asks a question and it just goes into the void, they'll never come back. But if they go there and they get an answer from you there, they'll come back. And as soon as you see someone else, like that business champion, answering questions even though it's not their job, now I'm segueing over to the right-hand side of the slide. Not only do you say thank you to them, but you copy their boss on it and say, wow, really appreciate you going above and beyond. This makes a big difference in our, whatever the heck our strategic goals are, but you're helping make them a reality. Thank you for that. And if you do this, you can build a virtuous cycle, a flywheel of constructive action. But one of the things that a lot of us as technical professionals don't understand is adult human motivation. And I don't understand this either, but I once read a Psychology Today article while sleeping in a Holiday Inn Express, I might add. Okay, there's some other old person on the call who saw those television commercials.
Yes, they did.
So
I'll roll the light on for you.
So there's 3 primary intrinsic motivators that are common for adult human people. And I say intrinsic motivators because this is separate from things like raises and money and promotions, those extrinsic motivators that are easier to apply but less sticky in their impact. So the intrinsic motivators, we have skill variety. So I'm not doing the same boring thing day in and day out. There is task identity, which is saying, I understand how the work that I am doing now applies to a bigger whole. Like I know that these inputs are going to come out and drive this value somewhere else. And then there is task significance, which often means the work that I am doing is making the world a better place. It's making somebody else's life better because I'm doing the thing that I'm doing.
Yes.
Independent of these and complementing these are autonomy, which is I get to choose what I do or when I do it within some reasonable constraint, and feedback, where if I'm doing a good job, somebody lets me know, and if I'm not doing a good job, somebody still lets me know so that I can start doing a good job. And when you think about the community where you're trying to encourage behavior for people to do things that they have not done before, in which odds are it's not their freaking job, you really need to understand this type of motivation and how you can say thank you. So I'm going to step back and provide an example from my day-to-day work. A lot of what I do for like this NDA customer community that I help manage is I go out of my way to say, please help us understand whatever the hell the topic of the day is, so that we can make Power BI a better tool for you and your organization and organizations like yours. And when they do it, I say, thank you for investing this time. We appreciate it, because this is what we need to ship the things that you need and actually make Power BI a better tool for you and your organization and people like you. And I say it a lot, and I mean it every single time, because their input is what lets us make Power BI the awesome thing that it is. And if we didn't have their input, we would be shooting in the dark trying to figure out what we needed to build and what our priorities were. So we listen, we learn, we say thank you, we make sure that we are always letting people know how their contributions are helping.
Awesome.
And I'd like to hold additional Q&A until the end if I can. I've got a few more things to run through, and then we can wrap things up and get on to the discussion parts of things. Does that work for you, Mike?
Yes, perfectly acceptable. Everyone is having a good time in the chat. I think everyone has been very encouraged by your "I am the path of most resistance." Everyone got a number of really good chuckles, so love it.
Excellent. And if you were to email me that at the end of the talk, I will have forgotten it by the time we're done, because I am in output mode right now.
Yes.
But that's definitely a good one to remember.
I'll send you the t-shirt.
I will take that. So as we're wrapping up, I want to share a quote that was from like the inside of a textbook that was part of my software engineering class that I failed in college. And this is from John Gall, who is a systems complexity expert. And this is one of the few things that I will read verbatim, because it's important. And even though it was not written about data cultures, it's something that I believe applies to data cultures, because data cultures are complex systems. And John Gall wrote, "A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that works. The inverse proposition also appears to be true. A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be made to work." And if we go back to one of the questions from earlier, it's like, well, we don't have these things. Where do we start? Start small. Figure out something that actually works at a small scale, and then scale it. Then make it complex and add the complexity incrementally, rather than trying to just do it all at once. Because if you try to do it all at once, it is 99% certain that you will fail. There's another quote that I love, which is from a different expert on a different type of complex system. So Sun Tzu, this ancient Chinese general and author of The Art of War, he said that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. If you don't know what your goals are, no amount of action is going to get you closer to them. It's just noise. It's just action. But if you know what your goals are, if you spend time getting consensus, which Sun Tzu probably didn't need, but you probably do, but get consensus on those strategic goals and what success looks like. If you know what success looks like, and all the people that need to agree, even if nobody has any idea on how to get there today, you are in a better place than if everybody hits the ground running without stopping to figure out what the destination is. Those strategic goals are inherently more important than any of the tactical steps to get you there, because if you get in the car and drive before you know where you're going, you're going to get somewhere, but it's 99% certain it's not going to be where you need to be. And then the final, I think this is my last content slide, but the final thing that I want to share is that there is no one path to succeed. So your starting point, your destination, the resources that are available to you, the constraints that you're operating under, all of these things are unique to you and your organization today. And originally, I thought about this as like, oh, well, here's a treasure map, and the X. There's an X that marks the spot, but you're going to be coming from a different direction depending on where you land. And the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that just doesn't work. So think about the river, right? You're on one side, you need to get to the other side. And if you look in the distance, the sides might be closer together. If you look in the front, the slides might be closer apart. If you wait until the rainy season, both of the sides might look more like this. So understand that there isn't a map or a guide that anyone can give you, but there are these well-known success patterns that you can follow and adapt and apply. And because today is Towel Day, if anybody here is a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan, I've added for today's session, don't panic. Honestly, the towel is optional in the real world, but not panicking is definitely key. And the way that you avoid panicking, if at all possible, is to have an executive sponsor. So as I wrap this up, I want to emphasize a couple different things. So the first one is the Power BI team has some effective guidance documentation touching on similar themes and Power BI best practices. I have both a blog and a YouTube channel where I have a 17-part series of videos and accompanying articles on the topic of building a data culture. It's roughly 3.5 hours worth of video content. This session is like the tops of the waves from some of those videos. And in addition to those 17 parts in the main series, there's probably another 20 or so articles on related topics that I do not have a video to support. That Power BI adoption framework that I mentioned earlier is out there. That includes both presentation recordings on YouTube and a collection of PowerPoint slides and Word document templates that you can use, download, use them for what they are. There is a set of Power BI customer success stories that my team publishes. These are the real world stories from actual customers like Nestle highlighted here and mentioned earlier, talking about the problems that they had, how they applied Power BI, Azure, and other Microsoft products and services to solve those problems, and then what success looked like for them. And this is something that has never been said publicly before. Next month, we're releasing the Power BI Adoption Roadmap, which is a new documentation and guidance resource that MVP Melissa Coates and I are developing that is designed to make it easier to do the things that we are talking about today with more prescriptive guidance and more examples. It's not going to be comprehensive, but it's going to be better than the resources that are available today, or that is our goal. End of June, this will be available publicly. If things go awful, it would be early July, but it's in flight. And now is the time for Q&A. I'll mention, here's the blog, here's me on Twitter if anybody wants to look me up. And with that said, it is over to you, Mike, for how we proceed.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So I'm going to try to transition things here briefly, and we'll see if all these OBS things hangs on and hang tight for us. I think we actually figured out the root cause. I think
was it Teams?
I think it was Teams, and I think when people were jumping in and out of the meeting, because they were using potentially the Teams link, which we might have accidentally, our fault, we accidentally shared that. So because the Teams link was there, what was happening is when the NDI whatever broadcasting thing transitioned, my OBS was just totally angry and could not handle it. So it was jumping in and out. So I'm going to attempt to transition screen here. All right, we have, well, your name's wrong, but we have a screen up. Let's see if I can fix the name real quick. Well, Michael's still learning how to technology a little bit. We're not going to be too judgmental. This is still Matthew. It's not Tommy Pugla, or Daniel, the MP. I have all my old things here. Just keep us on the screen here. We're going to transition out of this. We're actually going to do Q&A live. I'm going to share a link into the YouTube chat window For those of you who are on YouTube right now, I'll hang out in YouTube just a little bit longer, make sure the feed goes on a little bit extra, so you can click that link and then join us in the actual Teams meeting. And